Hello and welcome to iCatholic. I'm Wendy Grace. Well, I'm joined now in studio by Dr. Pat Kenny to talk to us a little bit about Fr Willie Doyle because he's now on the path to sainthood. Pat, of course, you authored a book all about Father Doyle, To Raise the Fallen. Before we go into the process that's underway for beatification, just tell us a little bit about him and who he was.
Well, in summary, Fr Willie Doyle was a priest who was willing to die to save a man's soul or to save a man's life. So that's the potted summary of his life, but a little more detail. He was born in Dalkey in 1873. He entered the Jesuits at the age of 18, and he entered the Jesuits in the Diocese of Meath, where the novitiate was in Rahan, which is in the Diocese of Meath. He spent 10 years as a priest. He was ordained in 1907, coincidentally in the same ceremony as Blessed John Sullivan. So interesting that
In good company.
good company, and that two Irish Jesuits whose causes are open were ordained together on the same day. He spent 10 years as a priest. In 1914, he volunteered to be a military chaplain in the First World War, and he went out to the front in 1915, and he served there looking after Irish soldiers until he was killed in the Battle of Passchendaele in August 1917. There was a huge devotion to him after he died. There was a major biography written about him in 1920. And there were several canonized saints, for example, who had a devotion to him. For instance, St. Teresa of Calcutta, St. Josemaria Escriva, and others had a devotion to him.
Why was that at the time?
Well, I think it was the success of the biography originally written by Alfred O'Reilly, which was translated into all the major languages of the world and went through multiple editions. And I think what really struck people was a combination of his incredible holiness, because Alfred O'Reilly had access to many of Fr Willie's personal diaries and spiritual notes, but he also included a lot of Fr Willie's letters home from the war. And those letters are in some ways scary because they reveal the horrors of war, but also charming because in the midst of this horror you see this holy man who is also joyful and serene in the midst of war and death. So the letters are fascinating in their own right. So Fr Willie's holiness speaks to many people. By the early 1930s, the Irish Jesuits had received over 50,000 letters asking about a cause or testifying to devotion to Fr Willie. And amongst them were over 6,000 letters alleging favours and healings through Fr Willie's intercession from literally all over the world, certainly many from Ireland, but also hundreds from the US, from England, from Asia, Africa, South America, Australia, etc. So really a global devotion to him at that stage.
One of the things that you mentioned earlier, Pat, was that Fr Willie was authentic in his faith and that he was willing to lay his life down for others.
Yeah, and I think that's an important part of why he's relevant for us today, because we live in a time where there's a lot of skepticism about the church and skepticism about priesthood. And here we have a priest that we can look to who is literally willing to die to save people's lives. And it's what's really interesting and has been ignored, I think, in Fr Willie's story, is that there were two Anglican soldiers that he was trying to rescue when he was killed. So in that sense, he's not only a martyr of charity, but also an ecumenical martyr of charity who laid his life down for non-Catholic soldiers. And we see him as a very unifying figure because not only was he an Irish priest who helped Irish soldiers in the British Army, but he also helped the German prisoners and offered pastoral care and spiritual support to them, wrote to their families and helped them in whatever way he could.
When you're talking about his spiritual writings and his letters that I know you've studied, and you think of, as you say, the horror that he would have seen in the war, but how did he maintain a level of deep faith, do you think?
Well, to step back a little bit, one of the really interesting things about his life is that when he was 20, he had a nervous breakdown because the novitiate building he was in went on fire, and he had to leave the Jesuits for a short period of time. 20 years later, we see him as this hero in the midst of bloodshed and death in the war. So a story of remarkable transformation and healing. And I think he's a very important role model and potential intercessor for many people who may suffer with anxiety or worry or depression in the era in which we live. But he sought to live much in the presence of God. I suppose he was constantly looking for opportunities to pray, even though it wasn't hard and it wasn't easy, rather in the trenches. And he also lived a very personally austere life. He sought to deny himself many pleasures and many comforts. But everyone else just saw him as a very joyful person. So his personal austerity didn't communicate itself to others. So I think it was that combination of prayer and penance that he kept very secret, but that was what really fueled him. For example, we know that in the trenches, he sometimes spent entire nights in prayer. So while the rest of us might be cowering in the corner trying to get as much sleep as we could, Fr Willie would occasionally spend 8, 9, 10 hours on his knees in the dugout beside the trench, praying all night long. So an incredibly holy man that I think can stand in the company of some of the greatest of saints.
And that's why you are part of this process of trying to get Father Willie on the path to canonisation. How does that all work, Pat? What's the process like?
So, well, the process is a petitioner needs to come forward and petition a bishop to take on the cause. So about 2 years ago, we founded the Fr Willie Doyle SJ, and that's a private association of the faithful. Our main aim is to promote the memory and to promote devotion to Father Willie, but we are now the official actor or the official petitioner for Father Willie's cause. So we petitioned Bishop Tom Deanahan of the Diocese of Meath, because that's the diocese, as I said, that Father Willie entered the Jesuits in. And having examined the case, examined the petition, and examined the existence of devotion to Father Willie, the bishop said yes, and he is going to open the cause formally on November 20th in Mullingar Cathedral. And the process from there is there are a number of diocesan processes, an historical commission and theologians who will examine Father Willie's writings. And if they approve of what they've seen, then the cause will go to Rome. And from the point of view of the Fr Willie Doyle Association, we'll be trying to promote as much awareness and devotion to Father Willie as possible. And we'll be distributing prayer cards, leaflets, holding talks and events, and looking for people to join us in this exciting journey. It's a journey that's not just about getting someone canonized, which is important in its own right, because only one Irish person has been canonized in over 500 years. But the process of canonization is in itself an act of evangelization, because by telling the story of Father Willie, somebody who laid down his life to save others, somebody who was joyful, somebody who overcame this mental health challenge that he had, somebody who was a unifying figure as an ecumenical martyr of charity, all of these are a very powerful witness for the age in which we currently live. And I think in many ways, Father Willie is a more relevant figure now than he was perhaps 100 years ago. So we very much see it, the entire process, as an evangelical outreach to try and communicate something of what it means to be an authentic Christian and an authentic Catholic for the people of Ireland today.
And someone to pray for intercession for, especially during this time where there is so much conflict and war in the world, and he was one who was in the trenches.
Absolutely. I mean, he hated the war, even though he wrote a lot about it, and he's a very important figure historically in terms of the Irish in World War I. He himself did not like the war. He wanted peace. So he's an important figure at this particular point in time. But we also want people to pray to Father Willie if they have needs, if they're looking for a miracle, if somebody is sick, because in order to progress a canonization cause, we need a miracle. So if anyone wants to get our prayer card, look on our website, williedoyle.org. We'll send you our prayer cards. The prayer will be there, and just seek his help and intercession.
Dr. Pat Kenny, thank you so much for talking to us about Father Willie Doyle. And as Pat said, there you can go to williedoyle.org and you can get all the details about the prayer cards and how you can get involved as well in this process of hopefully getting him beatified.